They said her son was a thief. They said it at the market, at the water point, at the church steps on Sunday morning. They said it the way people said things in a small community, not loudly, but everywhere, so that by the time the words reached Tigist herself they had already been inside every home on the road for 3 days. Before we begin, remember this. While the story you're about to hear is fictional, the message behind it is very real. At Zara Tales, we believe the right story at the right moment can change a life. The village sat 40 kilometers outside Addis Ababa, where the road turned to red dirt and the air smelled of eucalyptus and wood smoke and the particular freshness of high-altitude mornings. It was not a large place. Perhaps 300 families, most of them farming the terraced hillsides, some keeping small shops along the single paved lane that served as the village's center. There was a church with a painted tin roof, a school that shared its building with the community health post on alternating days, a market that convened every Thursday, and a web of social obligation so dense and so carefully maintained that a single accusation could pull threads from one end of the community to the other. Tigist had lived here for 26 years. She had come as a young woman of 26, the second wife of Otto Mesfin, a farmer of modest means and quiet temperament who had married his first wife, Zara Salam, 15 years before Tigist arrived. Salam had died of a fever when their 2 children were still young. Mesfin had mourned properly and then, when his children needed a mother's hand and his house needed a woman's management, he had married Tigist. This was not unusual. It was simply life, arranged the way life arranged itself in communities where survival required partnership and partnership required someone willing to step into a difficult place. Tigist had stepped into it willingly. She was a capable woman, practical and unhurried, with the kind of steadiness that did not announce itself but was felt by everyone around it. She took on the raising of Mesfin's 2 older children alongside the son she bore with Mesfin, Dawit, who arrived in the 2nd year of their marriage. She managed the household with careful attention. She helped with the farm when it was needed. She learned the rhythms of the community, its customs, its social calendar, the specific courtesies owed to specific people, and she observed them faithfully. What she could not manage, and had never managed in 26 years, was the first family. Mesfin's older sister, Zara Alematu, was 61 years old, broad-shouldered, and possessed of the particular authority that came from being the eldest surviving member of a family line in a community that valued lineage above almost everything. She had not approved of Tigist from the beginning. This was not entirely surprising. Tigist was younger, she was from a different district, and her arrival had changed the structure of a household that Alematu considered herself to have some oversight over. What had surprised Tigist, in the early years, was the persistence of the disapproval. It did not soften with time. It did not yield to effort or to deference or to the visible evidence of Tigist's care for the older children. It simply continued, steady as the seasons, expressed through small exclusions and pointed silences and the particular way Alematu spoke about Tigist to others, never quite an accusation, always something that landed just short of one. Mesfin had tried to bridge it. He was a man who preferred peace to confrontation and believed that time resolved most things. He had spoken to his sister privately. He had praised Tigist in Alematu's presence. He had, in his quiet way, made clear where his loyalty lay. But he was also a man who understood that his sister's goodwill was a kind of community currency, and that openly opposing her would cost him more than the discomfort of the existing arrangement. So the arrangement continued. Tigist was in the house. Alematu was at the edge of it, always present, never fully welcoming. Mesfin died 6 years ago. A heart that had worked hard for 58 years and then simply stopped on a Tuesday afternoon in the middle of planting season. After that, the balance shifted. With Mesfin gone, Tigist had no formal protection. The compound where she lived belonged, under custom, to the family line. Her position in it depended on the goodwill of people who had never felt goodwill toward her. The older children were adults by then, with their own households. Dawit, 24 now and working as a carpenter in the village, was the only one still living with her. Alematu had begun, in the years since Mesfin's death, to speak more openly about what she called the proper arrangement of family property. She had not yet moved against Tigist directly. But the movement was in her voice whenever she spoke of the compound, the farmland, the things Mesfin had left. Then the accusation came. Otto Germa was the wealthiest man in the village. He had made money in construction in Addis Ababa in the 1990s and returned to the village with enough capital to build a large house, acquire several plots of farmland, and establish himself as a man of consequence. He was not unkind. He employed several villagers on his property and paid fairly by local standards, but he carried the particular confidence of a man who had money in a place where most people did not, and this confidence sometimes expressed itself as certainty about things he had not fully investigated. The accusation was simple. Otto Germa said that a sum of money, 2,000 bear, kept in a metal box in his storage room, had gone missing. He said the only person who had access to the storage room in the days before the money disappeared was Dawit, who had been hired to repair a section of the roof adjacent to the storage area. He said he had no proof, but that he had found no other explanation. He said this first to Elder Bekele, the community's senior elder, and then, because a man of Germa's standing did not need to whisper, to several other people on the same day. By the following morning, the village knew. By the afternoon, the words had crossed Tigist's threshold and landed on her the way blows landed, not one at a time but all at once. Dawit was a quiet young man, careful in his work and respectful in his manner. He had his father's temperament, unhurried, steady, not given to performance or display. He had been repairing the roof section for 3 days. He had not been alone on the property. Abebe, Germa's elderly farmhand, had been present throughout. Dawit had not entered the storage room. He had climbed the roof from outside, worked from above, and come down each day when the light faded. He had seen the storage room door from the roof but had never opened it, never touched it, never had reason to. He said all of this to his mother with the calm, direct tone of a person telling the truth. Tigist believed him. She had believed him before he finished speaking. She knew her son. But believing and proving were different things, and in a community where Otto Germa's word carried the weight of money and standing, Dawit's word was starting from a different place. Alematu moved quickly. Within 2 days of the accusation becoming public, she had visited 3 of the community elders privately, not to make formal complaint, but to plant the kind of concern that grew on its own once it was placed. She said she had long worried about the influence of Tigist's household on the family name. She said it was painful to see Mesfin's legacy brought into question. She said these things with the careful sorrow of a woman carrying a burden she had not chosen, and the elders listened the way elders listen to senior women of established families, with respect, and with a weight given to her words that would not have been given to Tigist's. Alematu had been waiting years for a moment when Tigist was vulnerable. This was that moment, and she did not waste it. Tigist understood what was happening. She had lived in this village for 26 years and she could read its currents. She knew that the accusation against Dawit was the surface and that what moved beneath it was older and more deliberate. She also knew that understanding this and stopping it were not the same thing. She did what she could. She went to Otto Germa directly, the day after she heard the accusation. She stood at his gate in her good dress, the one she wore to church and to serious occasions, and she asked to speak with him. He received her, which was something. He listened while she explained that Dawit had not entered the storage room, that Abebe had been present every day, that the work had been external and there was no occasion for Dawit to have access to anything inside the house. She spoke without heat, clearly and with evidence. She asked Germa to wait before the matter went further. Germa listened. He said he understood her position as a mother. He said he was not a man who acted without thought. He said he would consider what she had said. He did not take back the accusation. She went home from Germa's gate and sat in the doorway of her house for a long time. The afternoon was warm. A neighbor's child passed on the road and waved. She waved back and watched the child go and thought about how a community was also this, ordinary afternoons and familiar faces and the life that continued around the difficult thing. She had learned, in 26 years, that the ordinary was not the enemy of the difficult. It was actually what made the difficult survivable. You kept moving through the ordinary things and they held you up while you dealt with the harder ones. She thought about Alematu. She thought about the speed with which the accusation had spread. A 2000 bear theft was not nothing, but it was not the kind of thing that usually moved through a village this quickly or this completely. Someone had helped it along. She thought about which elders Alematu would have visited and in what order and with what words. She thought about the particular efficiency of a woman who had been waiting for a vulnerability for 6 years and who, when one finally appeared, knew exactly what to do with it. Alematu was not a foolish woman. She was, in fact, quite intelligent, which was part of what made her dangerous. She understood the village's social architecture the way Tigist understood it, and she had been moving inside it for much longer and from a more established position. But Tigist had also spent 26 years inside this village. She had spent them at a disadvantage, which had forced her to understand the village differently, not from the position of standing but from the position of someone who had to earn every inch of trust she was given. That kind of understanding went deep. It told her things that standing sometimes hid from people. It told her which elders truly weighed evidence and which ones weighed relationships. It told her whose word would be heard at full value and whose at a discount. It told her that the gathering, for all its ceremony, was a human institution and human institutions responded to human things, to dignity, to truth clearly spoken, to the specific discomfort of being seen to be unfair in front of everyone you lived beside. She visited Elder Bekele next. Bekele was a man of 73, thin and precise, who had been presiding over community matters for 20 years with the patience of someone who had heard most things at least twice. He listened to Tigist with the same courtesy he gave everyone who came to him. He told her that a formal gathering would be convened to hear the matter. He told her she would have the opportunity to speak. He told her, not unkindly, that Otto Germa was a man of standing and that her son would need more than her testimony to satisfy the community. Tigist thanked him and went home. She sat on the low stool outside her door that evening, watching the light leave the sky in the way it left the sky at that altitude, quickly, completely, with the stars arriving fast behind it. She thought about Dawit inside the house, quiet, going about his evening without complaint, the way he always went about things. She thought about what Bekele had said. More than her testimony. She thought about who else had been there. She thought about Abebe. Abebe was 67 years old and had worked on Germa's property for 11 years. He was a small, weathered man, slightly stooped, with the particular quietness of someone who had learned to make himself unobtrusive in environments that did not fully belong to him. He had worked under 2 previous managers at the property before Germa arrived and had stayed on because the work was steady and because, at 67, the options available to a man without land or family savings were limited. He was not a man of standing. He had no family connections in the village. He had been here long enough to be known but not long enough to be rooted. His word carried the weight of his position, which was not much. Tigist went to see him the morning after her visit to Bekele. She found him at the edge of Germa's lower field, clearing a drainage channel. She greeted him quietly and he looked up with the expression of a man who had been expecting this and had not yet decided what to do with it. She did not ask him immediately. She sat on a nearby stone and spoke to him about ordinary things first. The weather. The state of the road after the recent rains. His health, which was not perfect. He had a pain in his lower back that had been present for 2 seasons. She listened when he spoke and she asked real questions, not performed ones, because she was genuinely interested in what he said. She had always been that way. It was one of the things Mesfin had loved about her. After a while, she said quietly that she needed to ask him something. She said she was not asking him to do anything. She only needed to know what he had seen. Abebe set down the tool he had been using and looked at the drainage channel. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said that he had been there every day. He said Dawit had worked on the roof. He said he had not seen Dawit enter the storage room or any part of the interior. He said it slowly, like a man who was choosing each word carefully. Then he stopped. Tigist waited. Abebe looked at her. He said that he had seen something else. He said it the way a person said something they had been carrying and needed to put down, not because they were ready but because the weight had finally exceeded what they could hold. He said that on the second day of Dawit's work, he had seen one of the household members enter the storage room. He named no name. He said only that it was not Dawit, that the person had been inside for several minutes, and that later that same day the person had left the property with a bag that had not been there in the morning. He had said nothing because the person was connected to the household and he was not. He had said nothing because he needed his position and he was afraid. He said all of this looking at the drainage channel, not at Tigist, the way a person confessed something they were not proud of holding. Tigist looked at him for a moment. She thanked him. She stood, straightened her dress, and walked home. She did not press him for the name. She already had a strong sense of it. But she also understood that a strong sense was not evidence and that what she needed was Abebe's voice in the right room at the right time. The question was whether his fear would allow it. She did not sleep well that night. She lay on her sleeping mat listening to the night sounds of the village, insects, a dog somewhere down the road, the distant sound of the main road traffic that became, with enough distance, almost like water. She thought about Abebe's words and the way he had said them. The careful, halting honesty of a man who had held something too long and was beginning to understand the cost of it. She thought about what he had seen and what it meant and how far a frightened old man's testimony would carry in a gathering where one side had elders already seated and the other side had nothing but the truth. The truth was not always enough. She had been alive long enough to know that. In communities like this one, truth arrived in a room already shaped by the stories people had heard before the gathering began. If those stories had been told by the right mouths, the truth had to work against a current. Alemetu had been working the current for days. The elders she had visited were not corrupt men. They were simply men who had heard one version of things before they heard another, and the first version had already begun to settle. Tigist knew she needed more than her word. She needed Abebe's voice in that room. And she needed to make it possible for Abebe to give it. She went back to see him the following evening, after the day's work was done. She did not go directly. She walked past Jerma's lower field and found him sitting outside his small quarters at the edge of the property, a tin cup of tea in his hands, watching the light leave the hills. She greeted him and sat on the ground nearby without waiting to be invited, because the situation had passed the point where formality was useful. She told him about the gathering. She told him what Bekele had said, that Dawit would need more than her testimony. She said this without accusation. She simply told him the shape of the thing and let him sit inside it. Abebe was quiet for a long time. He drank his tea. The hills went from gold to gray. He said that he was not a man the community listened to. He said his word would be placed against Otto Jerma's word and everyone in the room would know who had more standing. Tigist said that was true. She said it honestly because she did not think dishonesty would help either of them. She said that his word would not outweigh Jerma's alone. But she said that her two other witnesses could speak to what was visible from the road, and that his word, combined with theirs, would give the gathering something to hold that was different from what Jerma had put before them. She said the gathering would still decide. But they would decide with the full picture rather than one side of it. Abebe looked at the tin cup in his hands. He said that if he spoke against the household, he risked his position. At 67, with no savings and no family land, his position was his survival. Tigist looked at him with the steady attention she brought to difficult conversations. She said she understood that. She said she would not ask him to carry a cost she was not willing to acknowledge. She said she did not know what would happen to his position if he spoke. She did not pretend otherwise. She said only that a young man's name was being destroyed in front of a community that would remember it for the rest of his life, and that Abebe was the one person in the village who had seen the thing that could stop it. She stood up. She thanked him for the tea, though he had not offered any. She said she would see him at the gathering on Saturday, and she said it as though his presence were already settled, not as a pressure but as a simple fact that had not yet been announced. Then she walked home in the dark. In the days that followed, Tigist prepared carefully. She wrote down everything she knew, the timeline of Dawit's work, the external nature of the roof repairs, the fact that Abebe had been present throughout. She went back through her memory of the days in question and wrote down every detail she could recover. She spoke to 2 other people who had seen Dawit working on the roof from the road and who remembered the days in question. She asked them, gently, if they would be willing to say what they had seen at the community gathering. Both agreed, though one was nervous about it. She also thought about Alematu. She thought about the visits to the elders. She thought about the careful timing of it all, the accusation appearing at the exact moment that Alematu had been moving, slowly and steadily, toward a confrontation over the compound and the land. She thought about the way Jerma's accusation had been allowed to travel so quickly and so completely through the community without the usual skepticism that greets serious accusations. Someone had been smoothing the path. She could not prove this. She did not need to prove it in front of Bekele. But she kept it in her mind like a compass, because understanding the full shape of something helped you know where to stand when it moved. She had not heard from Abebe since that evening on the edge of the lower field. She did not try to contact him again. She had said what she had to say and she had meant what she said about not pressing him. A person who spoke under pressure gave testimony that could be picked apart. A person who chose to speak because they could not in good conscience remain silent gave testimony that held. She could not manufacture that choice for Abebe. She could only have told him the truth and left the door open. The night before the gathering, Tigist sat at the low table in her home and went through her written notes one final time. She had listed everything in the order she would say it. The roof work, the access point, the external nature of the repairs. The names and testimonies of her 2 witnesses. The timeline of the 3 days. She went through it the way she used to go through lesson plans when she had taught at the Sunday school, looking for the gap, the point where someone listening with a skeptical ear might find something to question, and making sure she had addressed it. Dawit came and sat beside her. He looked at her notes and then at her and said she had not needed to do all of this. She said she knew that. She said she had done it anyway because thorough was the only way she knew how to do things worth doing. Dawit was quiet for a moment. Then he said he was sorry she had to fight this hard for something that should not have needed fighting. Tigist looked at her son. He had his father's face and his father's stillness and he was 24 years old and his name was being spoken in ways that would follow him if she did not stop it. She said there was nothing to be sorry for. She said that some things required fighting and that the only question was whether you were willing. She said she was willing. She had always been willing. He already knew that. She had been willing for 26 years. She went to bed at 10 and lay there until midnight with the notes arranged in her mind. Then she slept, which surprised her. The sleep of someone who had done everything that could be done and was now simply waiting for the morning. The community gathering was set for a Saturday, in the open space beside the church where the large eucalyptus tree stood. These gatherings were a serious institution in the village. They were how the community settled disputes that could not be settled privately, how accusations were examined, how matters of property and honor were put before people who had standing to weigh them. Elder Bekele would preside. Other elders would be present. The community would attend, because community attendance was itself a form of accountability. It was harder to be dishonest in front of everyone you lived beside. Tigist arrived early. She wore the same good dress she had worn to Jerma's gate. She had pressed it the night before. She had braided her hair the way she braided it for church. Not because appearances resolved anything, but because she believed in showing up completely to the things that mattered. Dawit stood beside her. He was wearing his clean shirt, the white one he kept for serious occasions, and he looked, as he usually looked, like a man who was managing his fear by standing very still inside it. The gathering filled quickly. Most of the village came. Some came out of genuine concern for the matter. Some came because Otto Germa's involvement made it significant. Some came because a community gathering was where the texture of the village's life was most visible, and people came for that the way they came for the market, not always for what they needed, sometimes just to see what was there. Alematu arrived with 3 women from the first family. She positioned herself on the far side of the gathering, visible, her presence its own statement. She greeted the elders with the ease of a woman at home in rooms of authority. She did not look at Tigist directly. Otto Germa sat in the place of the accuser, which by custom was to the elder's right. He was dressed neatly, his manner composed, a man who had made accusations before and understood the proceedings. Elder Bekele opened with a prayer and then with the traditional words that preceded serious community business, a reminder that the gathering existed to seek truth, that all voices were owed respect, that the community's role was to listen and to weigh and not to decide before the evidence was complete. He invited Germa to speak first. Germa spoke clearly. He described the missing money, the metal box, the storage room, the timing. He said Dawit had been the only person working on the property during the relevant period. He said he held no personal hostility toward Dawit or his family. He said he simply needed the community to understand what had happened and to help determine the right resolution. Bekele thanked him and invited Tigist to speak. Tigist stood. The gathering went quiet in the particular way it went quiet when a woman with something to say commanded a room. She had been teaching Sunday school for 15 years and she had been managing difficult conversations in Mesfin's household for 26, and she knew how to fill a silence with her voice without raising it. She described Dawit's work. She described its external nature. She described the roof, the access point, the daily hours. She introduced the 2 community members who had seen Dawit working from the road and both of them confirmed what they had seen. She was precise and calm and she gave the gathering the full picture of what Dawit had and had not done in the 3 days on Germa's property. Then she said that there was someone else who had been present throughout those 3 days. Someone who could speak to what had happened not from the road but from the property itself. She looked at the edge of the gathering where Abebe stood. He had come. She had not been certain he would. He was standing slightly apart from the crowd, his arms folded, his face carrying the expression of a man who had made a decision in the night and was living with it in the morning. Elder Bekele looked at Abebe. He invited him to come forward if he had something to say. The crowd shifted. Germa's face changed. Not dramatically, he was a man accustomed to composure, but something moved behind his eyes as Abebe stepped forward into the center of the gathering. Something that Tigist noticed and filed away. Abebe stood before the elders. He was small and slightly stooped and his voice when he began was not loud. But the gathering was completely quiet, and in that quiet his words carried. He said he had been present on the property every day that Dawit worked on the roof. He said Dawit had not entered the storage room. He had not entered any part of the interior of the house. He had worked from outside, on the roof, and had come down at the end of each day and gone home. He said this plainly, looking at Elder Bekele, his voice steady in the way that voices were steady when they were telling the truth and had accepted the cost of it. Then he said the rest. He said that on the 2nd day of Dawit's work, he had seen a person enter the storage room from the inside of the house. He said the person had been inside for several minutes. He said that later that afternoon, the person had left the property carrying a cloth bag that had not been present in the morning. He said he had not reported this because he was afraid. He said he was old and he had no savings and he needed his position on the property and he had told himself it was not his business. He said he had been wrong to stay silent and that the silence had hurt an innocent person and he could not continue to hold it. The gathering had gone very still. Elder Bekele asked Abebe to name the person he had seen. Abebe looked directly at the elder. He said the name. It was not Dawit. It was a name the gathering recognized, a young man from the household's inner circle, a relative of Germa's who had been staying at the property for several weeks. A young man who had, in the days since the accusation against Dawit became public, been notably absent from the village. The gathering broke into low, urgent conversation. Bekele struck the ground with his walking stick for order. The conversation settled. Germa's composure had left him. He sat forward in his seat with his hands on his knees and his face showing the particular struggle of a man reckoning with something he had not prepared for. He had made the accusation in good faith, or so he would say later. He had not known. Or he had not wanted to know. Those two things were related and the gathering understood the relationship. Alematu, at the far edge of the crowd, said nothing. But several people near her turned to look at her, and what passed across her face in that moment was something between anger and the beginning of a reckoning she had not anticipated. She had helped accelerate the accusation against Dawit. She had visited the elders. She had used Germa's words to advance her own design. And now the words had been overturned in front of everyone she had ever tried to impress with them. Elder Bekele spoke. He said that the gathering had heard from the accuser, from the accused mother, and from a witness who had direct knowledge of the events in question. He said the testimony of the witness, combined with the corroborating accounts from those who had observed Dawit's work from the road, provided no basis for the accusation to stand. He said the matter would be investigated further with respect to the person Abebe had named, and that this investigation would be conducted appropriately. He said the accusation against Dawit was withdrawn from standing as of this gathering. He looked at Germa. He said that a man's word was his most valuable possession in a community, and that care should be taken before it was used against another man's son. Germa nodded once. He said he accepted the finding. He said he would make the appropriate apology to Tigist and Dawit privately. He said it without performance, which was the right way to say it. Bekele then looked at Alematu. He did not address her directly, but what he said was addressed to her. He said that community gatherings existed to protect the truth, not to serve private arrangements. He said that the elders were aware of conversations that had taken place in the days preceding this gathering, and that the community expected those who spoke to its elders to come with clean hands. He let that sit for a moment before moving on. Alematu sat very still. She did not respond. Around her, the women she had come with looked at the ground. The gathering was closed with a prayer. People began to move and talk. Dawit stood beside his mother, and she placed a hand briefly on his arm, not dramatically, just a touch, the kind that said, "I told you. I knew." Several people came to speak to Tigist in the minutes after the gathering ended. Some to express what they should have said before the gathering, that they had not truly believed it, that they had known Dawit was a good boy. Tigist received all of it with a quiet grace that cost her nothing and said everything. She did not remind anyone of what they had failed to say earlier. She did not need to. Abebe stood a little apart, as he usually stood. Tigist went to him when the crowd had thinned. She thanked him. She said it simply, without excess. He nodded and looked away toward the eucalyptus tree and said that he should have spoken sooner. She said that he had spoken when it was needed and that this was what mattered. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone receiving something they had not been certain they deserved. Then he turned and walked back toward Germa's property, where his work was, as it had been every morning for 11 years. In the weeks after the gathering, several things settled. Germa came to Tigist's home, as he had said he would, and offered his apology in person. He was not a small man and it was not a small thing for him to do. Tigist received him at the door and invited him in and made coffee the proper way, and they sat and talked for an hour about nothing much, which was the only way to say what needed saying after something like this. Before he left, he said he would like to offer Dawit further carpentry work on his property when Dawit was willing. Dawit said he would consider it. The investigation into the household relative confirmed what Abebe had seen. The young man had already left the area before the gathering. The money was gone with him. The matter was referred to the appropriate authorities in Addis Ababa. Whether it would be fully resolved was uncertain. Many such matters were not. But the truth of it had been established in the one place that mattered most to Tigist, in front of her community. Alematu did not come to Tigist's house after the gathering. She did not send word. What she did instead was something smaller and more significant than either of those things. She stopped speaking. For the first time in 26 years, her voice on the subject of Tigist and her son and the compound and the family name went quiet. Whether this was shame or calculation or something in between, Tigist could not say. She did not need to say. The silence itself was enough, a space where pressure had been and was no longer. Tigist went to church the Sunday after the gathering. She sat in her usual place, near the left wall, 3 rows from the front. The service was long, as it always was, with the choir singing the old hymns in Amharic that filled the small building the way sound filled every corner of a room it belonged to. Tigist sang with them. She had a good voice, always had. Mesfin used to say she sang like someone who meant it. She had always meant it. After the service, walking home along the red dirt road with the eucalyptus trees moving in the morning wind, she thought about the gathering and what had happened in it. She thought about Abebe standing in the center of it, small and steady, saying the true thing at the cost of the comfortable thing. She thought about Dawit standing beside her with his fear held still inside him. She thought about the 26 years of small exclusions and pointed silences and the morning she had stood at Jerma's gate in her good dress and asked to be heard. She thought about Mesfin and the way he had loved her, not perfectly, because no one loved perfectly, but consistently, in the way that counted. She was not finished here. This she knew. The compound was still contested in the way that things were contested in families where one faction had never accepted the other. Alematu's silence was not surrender. The land questions would return. There would be other mornings that required the good dress and the steady voice. She was 52 years old and she had been preparing for them since she was 26, one day at a time, one truth at a time, in a community where her name had taken a long time to belong to her. But on this particular morning, on this red dirt road with the eucalyptus moving overhead and the sound of her own footsteps on the ground that had been under her feet for more than half her life, she felt something she did not always feel. She felt that she had enough. Enough standing. Enough truth. Enough ground beneath her feet to meet whatever came next without flinching. Her son was not a thief. The community knew it. The elders had said it out loud. And somewhere in the village, an old man had chosen courage over comfort when it mattered, and that had made the difference. Sometimes the whole world turns on one person deciding not to look away. Abebe was not powerful. He was not wealthy. He had no status and no savings and no family connections to protect him. But he had seen something true and he had stayed with it, in the silence of his own fear, until the moment came when staying silent cost more than speaking. And when that moment arrived, he stood up in the middle of a gathering and said what he knew. That was all. That was everything. This is for every mother who has defended her child with the truth when the truth was the only thing she had. And this is for every quiet person in the back of the room who saw something real and is still deciding whether to speak. Speak. The moment always comes. Be there for it. Thank you for watching this story on Zara Tales. If it moved you, like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one.